The dim light flickered in the corner of the bar, casting a worn amber hue over the scratched wood of the counter. Henry Bowers sat alone, sipping a cheap beer from a mug that had seen better days. At 68, his face told stories his lips rarely shared. Deep creases lined his forehead, a crooked nose from a long-forgotten bar fight, and eyes, those pale blue eyes that held oceans of silence. Henry wasn't always this way. Once, decades ago, he had a fire that couldn't be tamed. He spoke in punches of truth and burned with the passion of someone who knew life could vanish at any second. But life had its way with him. And now, as he sat alone in the corner of a half-empty bar in Kansas City, he thought of all the things he wished he had known at 20. Charles Bukowski once wrote about broken bottles, women, poverty, and poetry. But more than that, Bukowski wrote about life. Raw, unfiltered, and scaldingly honest. Henry had discovered Bukowski in his 20s, and though he lived wildly, he hadn't quite learned what Bukowski was really trying to teach. Not then, but now. Now Henry knew. He closed his eyes and remembered that summer of 1978. Back when he was just 19 and had dreams big enough to fill the Missouri River. The first lesson Bukowski would have shouted at young Henry: "Don't waste your time chasing approval." Henry had spent years trying to impress people who never cared to begin with. He went to college because his father insisted, studied accounting even though numbers drained the soul from his bones. He wore suits and sat in cubicles for 15 years, watching his dreams die under the hum of fluorescent lights. Only after a nervous breakdown and a divorce did he finally quit, moved into a rundown apartment on the edge of town, and began to write, what he should have been doing all along. If he could speak to his younger self now, he would say, "You didn't need to prove anything to them. You just needed to live." Bukowski always warned about the trap of mediocrity, about working jobs you hate just to buy stuff you don't need. Henry had bought the car, the TV, the expensive suits. But none of it brought peace. He remembered vividly the day he signed his first lease on a one-bedroom shack after the divorce. It had a leaky faucet, creaky floors, and a view of a back alley filled with trash cans. But it was the first time in years he had slept through the night. Lesson 2. Comfort is the enemy of passion. There's a poison in comfort, one that lulls you into thinking you're okay while your dreams die quietly. Henry had been comfortable for too long. It wasn't until everything fell apart that he realized he'd been sleepwalking through life. When he turned 30, Henry fell in love with a waitress named Liz. She was wild, unpredictable, and loved jazz at 2 a.m. He remembered lying with her on the roof of her apartment, smoking cheap cigarettes, staring at the stars. She believed in him, his words, his writing. But Henry, still haunted by his failures, pushed her away. He thought he wasn't good enough, that she'd leave like the rest. But she didn't. He did. That was another lesson Bukowski would have insisted upon. Let love in, even if it terrifies you. Fear had stolen so much from Henry. Love time joy. He had hardened his heart when what he needed was to let it break open. Years passed. Henry worked odd jobs. Loading docks, short-order cooking, janitorial work. But every night he wrote. Sometimes poems. Sometimes short stories. Most of them ended up in a drawer. But one night, he sent a short story to a local magazine. It was published 6 months later. Then another and another. His words began to live in the world, even if only in the shadows. He never became famous. But he became real. And Bukowski would have said that was enough. You don't need a stage. You just need honesty. Henry's stories weren't about heroes or big events. They were about everyday struggles. The pain of routine. The silence of middle age. The sharp ache of watching time pass. He had lost touch with Liz. He often thought of her when the nights stretched long. Once he wrote a poem about her, titled, "The Rooftop Never Left Me." It was never published, but it lived in his drawer, in his memory, in his regret. He learned another truth. Regret is a slow burn, but it never truly dies. That's what Bukowski meant when he said the soul needs scars to prove it's alive. But what Henry wished most was that he had lived braver, younger. 50, Henry adopted a dog. A scrappy mutt with one eye and a mean bark. He named him Rebel. Rebel became his companion through the darkest winters. They'd walk for miles at dawn, and Henry would find stories in the way the city woke up. The way a bakery's door would open and release a cloud of warmth. The way a teenager rode his bike like he was escaping something. The way an old woman sat on the same bench every morning, whispering to ghosts. In these walks, Henry learned the importance of noticing the little things. Bukowski had always written about the beautiful filth of real life. The beer cans, the broken locks, the crack in the sidewalk where flowers still grew. Life wasn't meant to be perfect. It was meant to be felt. Once, during a winter storm, Rebel ran off. Henry searched for him for hours, slipping on ice, shouting into the wind. He found him under an old bridge, shivering. Henry wrapped the dog in his coat and sat with him until sunrise. That moment taught him something else Bukowski hinted at in every line he wrote. Loyalty matters more than words. Now, sitting in that dive bar at 68, Henry looked around. There were younger men in the corner, talking loud, pretending to be confident. He saw himself in them. The illusions of strength, the fear of failure masked by arrogance. He wanted to walk over, shake them and say, "Don't wait. Don't wait until your body hurts and your nights are silent. Live now." Bukowski's final lesson. Write your truth, even if it's ugly. Henry had written hundreds of poems, many about pain, loneliness, and quiet triumphs. A few were published in indie magazines. But most were just his. Proof that he existed. Proof that he felt. One morning, Henry woke to a letter in the mail. A publisher had read one of his stories and wanted to include it in a collection of working-class writers. Henry read the letter 3 times before he smiled. Not a big smile, but one of those deep, tired smiles that carried decades. The collection was printed. His name, small and humble, nestled between others. Few people read his work. Few sent letters. One woman wrote, "I cried when I read your story about the man who loved jazz and let her go. I think I've been Liz my whole life." Henry wrote back, "Then don't let anyone walk away. Even yourself." The bar grew quieter as the night deepened. Henry sipped the last of his beer, pulled his coat tighter and stood. His knees ached, his back stiffened, but his spirit somehow that still had weight. As he stepped outside, the wind slapped his face. He smiled at the cold. It reminded him he was still alive. He lit a cigarette and whispered to the sky, "Thanks, Bukowski. I didn't get it at 20. But I do now." He took one last puff and walked down the empty street. A man with nothing left to prove. Only stories left to tell.